side of social credit because they object to the purpose of those financial proposals. That is to put the individual in the position where he's free.
I think large numbers of people, fairly large numbers, but a very small minority, who seek power above all, would disagree with us fundamentally. But most people simply want to live their own lives and to have the power to do so, both economic and, if necessary, political. But if we had the economic power, the politics would become, I think, a minor matter. There are not many political matters that are not concerned in some way with economics and with money.
What about a few words on Douglas the man?
I think all I can say is that he was big. I don't mean physically. He was just large-minded. He had a comprehensive sort of mind, and at the same time he was able to view the world disinterestedly. That's a word sometimes misused to mean uninterest. That was very far from it. I mean impartially, as it was. I've never met anyone with his capacity for that. In fact, I think Elisabeth and I were, and of course many other people, and alas most of them died off by now, were privileged to know a genius. And that's a word I don't use lightly.
You would say then that most of the prophecies, if you use that word, that he made, if we pursued present policies, have virtually come about. We've gone from one disaster to the next. We've seen your own country reduced to a situation where its very independence is threatened.
On economic grounds, way back in 1918, he wrote that I didn't call it price inflation, continuous rise in prices was inevitable. It was mathematically built in. And all the economists jeered and said, oh, nonsense, and you're just mistaking temporary variations. You have inflation and deflation and so on. They managed a tiny bit of deflation during the Great Depression, but look at it now. I mean, inflation is totally built in, and it's mathematically built in. It's absurd monkeying about with interest rates and such things. They can sometimes shock people a little bit into postponing their debts a bit. But the inflation that is now completely worldwide is a built-in feature of the credit system now, which from our point of view is the debt system. It didn't happen all through the ages because in those days money was a real commodity. It's a metal of intrinsic value. And people get hopelessly confused about this because we still use bits of metal as coins, but they're merely little tokens. Money is bank credit. That's the top-down view. From our point of view, money is debt, repayable with interest. And he went further to show that the complication and time span of the industrial process automatically builds in a time lag between the prices that must be generated in the process of production. All the costs must be added up. You must get the price back at least, plus some profit, if you're to remain in business. And the incomes distributed in the processes of production, which are spun out over a long time, and inevitably there's a huge time lag between them. And this, again, is blatantly obvious now. It was all denied then. But that results in a continual shortage of purchasing power. Economists will raise their hands and say, oh, there are floods of money, there's far too much, and all that, chasing too much money, chasing too few goods. And they simply ignore the minus sign which is attached to the money. A very large part of it is borrowed, is debt. But when Douglas said these things in the early 20s, there wasn't such a thing as consumer credit, hire purchase, the never never, all that. Now the economy depends upon it. His point is entirely proved. Not that you'll get economists to agree with you. They'll dodge it by descending into some sort of jargon and say, oh yes, you wouldn't understand if you hadn't economic agreement. So there's this contrast between people who look first at the world as it is, the real world, of production and consumption of goods and energy and so on, and then look at the money world. They've got it upside down. They look at the money first, and money controls everything.
Well, moving along now to the current situation in Britain, how do you see it now, the common market and what's happening in Europe? And particularly, I would say that many Australians are most interested in this remarkable woman, Margaret Thatcher. What's her position in the scheme of things?
Well, on the one hand, we find she's almost alone in the world among top politicians who are standing up as far as they can in the isolation she's in, except for the common people backing her, against, for instance, the continual centralization of Europe, against, in particular, Britain joining the European Monetary Fund. We just can't expect one woman all alone to stand up indefinitely, but she has gained time. On the other hand, we are afraid that on the home front, she may lose her power base, because the things that the people surrounding her in her own party persuaded her to do, they look all right on the surface, but just to mention one of them, which you experience here, the word privatization sounds lovely, doesn't it? But as if the private individual is going to own the former public services. But we can all, Australians and British, see through that. Services are going into the hands of multinationals instead of national organizations. And that is losing her credit at home. And she may lose the next election if she goes on along those lines at home. And then of course, she can exert